The purpose of depression is the absence of emotion. When you're depressed, you're flat. So it's trying to protect you. It's actually a function of the brain, not a dysfunction. There's no way you could not have had post-traumatic stress after an event like that based on the way the mind works. It's not about you, it's about the way our system works. The mind does everything for a purpose. It goes into a depressed state to protect you, right? It goes into an anxious state to protect you. I'm not choosing to be depressed. I'm not choosing to be anxious. It's just the way the system works.
All right, welcome to the Superhuman Entrepreneur Podcast. I am Dr. Jeremy Ipson. You know me as Dr. J, and I'm here with my new great, amazing friends, Dr. Don Wood. We're going to dive into some amazing things when it comes to unlocking your performance. You can see back in his background, he works at the Inspired Performance Institute in Orlando, Florida. I'm really excited to dive into this, and Don, I'm glad you're here.
No, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. So we have a lot of things in common. I love what you're doing and how we can work together.
Yeah. In fact, we were at a mastermind event and you were explaining what you do. And as I listened, I was like, does he do the exact same thing that I do? Because the way you were talking about it was so close to how I describe what I do. And then when we actually dove into it, found out we're approaching performance and health and optimization from two completely different directions to help unlock people's performance. So tell us about that. What's your approach to performance and how do we unlock that?
I'm coming from the mind on what's going on with the mind. And what I've discovered is that unresolved trauma affects the way our mind works. And if we don't get that trauma resolved, it's going to affect our performance. So I say it goes all the way down into the DNA. It actually goes into the mitochondria, and people don't realize it. So some of the highest performing professionals, sports athletes, have an effect on the way trauma is affecting their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, like I just said, we're approaching this from two different areas. Of course, we dive much more into lab work and cellular health, but they're so connected. People don't realize how much of an impact your mind is making and how your energy day to day and how you perform.
Yeah, so like I said, even from the mitochondria, that energy that is being used by the trauma loop that keeps on running affects the amount of energy you have available for your performance. And people don't realize it. So we see after we take people through our program, they'll start making personal bests and don't even realize that it happened. They just realize that they start performing better. I've got all kinds of just crazy examples of people saying, I didn't realize that it was doing that. And then afterwards, they start seeing the changes in the way they perform.
Yeah. And I definitely want to dive into some of those. And that's the unlocking that superhuman potential that people have. That's what we talk about here on the Superhuman Entrepreneur Podcast. But first, I want to take a step back because I know you have an amazing story about how your daughter helped you to come across this and develop this whole approach that you have. So where did this start? And how did you, what's the journey that took you to get to here?
I would never have imagined I would have been here. I didn't really come into this to develop. It was really because my daughter experienced two autoimmune disorders. Her first one was Crohn's that she developed when she was 13. And they told us, we don't know what causes Crohn's and we know there's no cure for it. She's going to have to manage this for the rest of her life. And during that time, they cut out 24 inches of her intestines during 4 different operations and said she's eventually going to end up with a colostomy bag. And we couldn't find any answers. The only thing that we were being told was take her off of gluten, take her off of dairy, manage her diet, all that stuff. But none of that was really helping. And then she developed years later a second autoimmune disorder, idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis. And they had her in ICU for 3.5 weeks. And they ran a battery of tests and came back with that diagnosis. And again, they said, there's no cure for this. We don't know what causes it. And so their advice was she should live close to a hospital because her lungs could fill up with blood in 15 minutes and she'll choke to death. So that was where my wife then turned to me and she said, I was adopted, so we didn't know my genetic history. So my wife says, this must be your fault. This must be coming from your side of the family. It must be a genetic problem. We need to figure this out or we're going to lose our daughter. And so I went on a research journey to try to figure out what was causing it. And what we didn't know at the time is that all the research was leading me towards all these people with all these autoimmunes were all dealing with trauma and they had trauma in their life. But my daughter didn't have trauma. As far as we were concerned, she had the life I had. I had an idyllic childhood, great family, great parents. And so we sat her down and we said, is there something we don't know? And then she disclosed to us that she had some abuse when she was 6 that she never disclosed to us. Then the dots started connecting and said that was the same thing that people that I was talking to were dealing with. So then I had to figure out what is trauma doing, right, to the mind and the body. And through the research, I discovered that this unresolved trauma keeps running and looping, which that constant trauma response, fight or flight response, is going to create inflammation. And the inflammation is not a bad thing. A lot of people say, oh, inflammation is terrible, but it's chronic inflammation that's the problem, not inflammation. So her genes that regulate inflammation would upregulate, and the genes that regulate the immune system would downregulate. So now you've got this gap in between immunity and inflammation. You can drive a truck full of disease through that. And that's what she was dealing with. And so we didn't know it at the time, but that sort of led me on to if I can fix the trauma, then I can fix the problem. And there were no solutions to fix trauma at that point. So I had to develop something.
Yeah. And that's where I definitely go next. 'Cause I was talking just yesterday with a client whose former military has a lot of PTSD stuff going on, and he's getting stuck with his energy, sleep, and it's just continually getting worse and worse. And so I started talking about your program, and I'm all about resolution. I don't want to maintain anything. Maintenance of a disease or condition does not sound any interesting at all. So that's why I like how you were talking as well about getting to the resolution of the issue. And so how did that come about? And what do you do to help people to get to a resolution with they're dealing with trauma like that?
So what I just learned through all of this research is that the trauma, the subconscious mind is where the issue is coming in. The subconscious mind operates in the present and it manages about 95% of everything that's going on in our lives right now. So your 95% subconscious mind is operating in the present. And the trauma that you experienced from when you were 5 or 10 or whatever is running in real time. So it's what I call a glitch. Your mind is accessing memory from 20, 30 years ago, but seeing it in real time. So your subconscious thinks something's happening now. So it wants a resolution to it. It's trying to get you to run or fight, but nothing's happening. So your mind doesn't know that. Now, consciously, we know that. The 5% conscious mind is fully aware that there's nothing happening, but the subconscious is trying to create an action. So, what I explain to people is anytime you have an emotion, a feeling, or a sensation, your mind is calling for an action, is trying to get you to do something. So, what's the purpose of fear? The purpose of fear is to run, escape. What's the purpose of anger? Is to attack or extinguish the threat. So if you think about something that happened to you when you were 10 years old or 5 years old or even a year ago, and you feel fear, that's the glitch. Your mind is trying to get you to run a year ago, 5 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever it is, and you can't do it. And it keeps on running and looping. So that's going to keep you in a perpetual state of fight or flight, which is then going to activate the whole system and the inflammation shows up.
Yeah. And then that, like you said, I loved that what you said, it opens up the valley for that disease truck to drive in. And whether that's an autoimmune disease or heart disease with a heart attack or any other type of condition, like that has a huge, big, giant piece of how that's happening.
Yeah. And people aren't aware of it. They wouldn't think. A lot of people, I've had people say to me, I haven't had any trauma. And so by the time we start getting into it, they'll say, this happened and that happened. Those are traumatic events. The second book I wrote, I called Emotional Concussions. They're not the big T trauma. They're an emotional concussion. That bump that you got by the teacher, the coach, the parent that said something to you, especially when you're very young, between 0 and 7, when your brain is literal and it takes in everything literally, that's when a lot of the trauma comes about. But you may not consciously remember it, but it's running in the background.
Yeah. Those events, whether they're capital T trauma or little T trauma, they, like you said, they're pre-programming that subconscious to be aware and always running. So
Yeah. And your subconscious doesn't know that something's not real. That's why I always explain to people, why can we go into a movie and get scared? Because our conscious mind knows a movie, but our subconscious mind thinks it's real. And that's why we'll jump, right? Because it sees everything as real. And especially for athletes, why visualization is so important. Because if you can visualize yourself doing it, your mind doesn't know if you're really doing it or visualizing it. So it responds the same way. The brain lights up the same way as if you're visually doing it or physically doing it.
And that can have a big impact. One of the things that I see a lot, especially with people that have dealt with a lot of small t trauma that's added up over time, is they get to the point where apathy sets in and they just are not motivated, no energy. They just can't, even though consciously they know they want to go, but subconsciously they just can't make themselves do stuff. And it's frustrating for them because they might have got to the point where they built a good business. We work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and but then they just hit this brick wall of energy and focus and they can't ever build their business. And I think a lot of it ties directly back to what you've been explaining here.
One of the things that I talk about, which is very different, is when people say to me, they'll come in and they'll say, I'm depressed. And I'll say, tell me what you're angry about. And they'll go, no, I'm not angry, I'm depressed. And I go, depression's anger. So I said, if you understand the concept of what I'm talking about, is anytime you have an emotion, your mind wants an action. So if something happened to you 20 years ago, and for 20 years your mind kept trying to call you into an action, kept saying, fight back, defend yourself, but you can't do it, it's impossible. How does your mind protect you? It shuts down. It goes into a depressed state. The purpose of depression is the absence of emotion. When you're depressed, you're flat. So it's trying to protect you. It's actually a function of the brain, not a dysfunction. But the first thing they're going to do is put you on an antidepressant, right? Which is trying to manage it as opposed to fixing it.
Right.
So what I say is, let's take a look at what could cause your mind to go into a depressed state. And if we resolve the trauma, we'll resolve the depression. Very different way of looking at it.
For sure. Yeah, like I said, it's very similar to our approach with health. Instead of how can we manage your high blood sugars, let's figure out what's causing that and be able to reverse that on the physiologic side of things. All right, I know you have some amazing stories. And so I want you to go through your Rolodex of success stories. Is there a couple that come to mind that you think would be beneficial for the listeners here, for our potential superhuman entrepreneurs?
Yeah, if I look at Rebecca Gregory, she was at the Boston Marathon. She was 4 feet from the first bomb that went off. Her whole testimonial is on our site. When she was at the event, the bomb, her son was sitting at her feet. So she was hit from behind and she ended up losing her left leg from the bomb. And she's actually had, I think, 78 operations ever since through all the shrapnel that was put into her body. But she came to see me 5.5 years after the bombing. And she said to me, I'll be honest with you, it sounds too good to be true that you can get rid of my post-traumatic stress in 4 hours. She says, but I'm desperate because I have a terror nightmare every single night. I know when I lie down to go to sleep, I'm going to have a nightmare. And so if you watch her testimonials, she'll say, I can't believe how you could get rid of post-traumatic stress that fast. But what I said to her is, I said, the reason, so when she started to first talk, she started to shake and cry. And I said, Rebecca, do you know why you're shaking and crying right now? And she says, because I'm talking about what happened to me. And I said, that's right. But as you're talking about it, your mind is seeing it. Your mind's trying to get you to run. It's in fear that a bomb is about to go off behind you. It doesn't know that bomb was 5.5 years ago. It thinks it's now. That was such an amazing concept for her to understand. Nobody had ever explained that. So I said, what we're going to do is take that memory that you had. So the best way I can explain it is if I asked you, Dr. J, what did you have for dinner last night? Can you tell me what you ate for dinner?
I had
Steak. So when I
very,
asked you
very
that,
normal dinner for me.
oh, that sounds like a good dinner. That's the kind of dinner I eat. But when I asked you that, did you see pictures of what you ate last night? Maybe where you ate it?
Yeah.
That's how you stored the information about dinner last night. No animal does that, only humans. We store explicit information about events and experiences. But last night wasn't threatening or disturbing, so it's stored as a fairly low resolution file. It has enough data that you could remember it, but it's not impactful. But if that was a threatening event, All your senses are heightened, sight, smell, hearing. So how's it going to record that? High definition, tremendous amounts of detail stored in that memory. So if you've got a system that operates in the present and something reminds it about that memory and it starts to look at that memory, when does it think the memory is happening? Right now. And it's going to activate the nervous system to put you into fight or flight. It has to. So one of the things that I say to people very early within the first 10 minutes is there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your mind. And that's what I said to Rebecca. There's no way you could not have had post-traumatic stress after an event like that based on the way the mind works. It's not about you, it's about the way our system works. So what I do is I say, what we're going to do is we're going to take 3 of those memories and I'm going to get your mind to reprocess that into the same format as to what you ate for dinner last night. And now she can talk about it and she doesn't shake and cry because her mind says, yes, it happened to me. So we're not going for happy. We're not trying to make it a happy situation. We're just going to stop the dysregulation of the nervous system. And that's really as simple as it is.
Yeah, it sounds really simple, but I know the mental process, the brain is amazing that it's doing so many things in that 4 hour or 1 day process that they can start that healing and reprogramming. It's amazing that the mind can do something like that. It's a testament to how complex it is and how important it is to get that dialed
It's
in.
so brilliant. As we know, all the work that you do and I do, we know the mind and body are designed to heal.
Right.
It just gets stuck. And once it gets stuck in a pattern, you've got to break the pattern. So what we do with the memory, so I'm doing it from the brain side of it, you're doing it from the body side, right? We just have to reset the system. It just needs a reboot. And then once you reboot the system, it just goes back to normal homeostasis and balance, which is supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then people are shocked and surprised how good and amazing they can feel and how they can function.
So I had another gentleman, his name is Marco Cisetto, and Marco is a marathon runner from Kenya. So when he came in to see me, the guy who sent him in, he makes the prosthetics for people like the Boston Marathon bombing survivors. And so he called me up and he said, Marco is a runner from Kenya. He lost both his legs below the knees to frostbite from a suicide attempt. So his cousin had committed suicide. He attempted suicide, passed out in the snow. They had to amputate his legs below the knees. He says, so we built him blades to start running marathons and we're training him, but he's improved, but he seems to have hit a plateau. He's not improving no matter how much more training we're doing. We think it's in his mind now. Can you take him through your program and see if you can improve his performance? So Marco came in to see me. 9 days later, he runs in a marathon and takes 15 seconds per mile off of his time, which is a huge change, especially at his level, right? And then about a month later, he runs in the Boston Marathon and breaks the world record. He's now the world record holder for marathoners with amputations. 2 months later, runs in the Chicago Marathon, breaks his own world record by another 5 minutes and gets signed by Nike. He's now a Nike athlete, right? And what I said to Marco is I said, Marco, I didn't make you faster. You were always that fast. You just didn't have access to the power that was being run by the trauma loop. And once we release that energy, you can perform better.
Yeah, our bodies and minds are so amazing. I always get chills when I hear your story, your success stories of things that are going on. All right. I know I work with mostly men who, of course, think they're all big and tough. And if we mention the word trauma, they'd be like, oh, I've never had trauma. Or they might be like, oh, yeah, there's a lot, but it's well hid under the rug. So what do you tell people if they feel like, one, they don't have any trauma in their life, or two, that's been suppressed down underneath, that they pretend that it doesn't exist?
So if they say that they can't remember it or they don't have it, just say, we will discover whether or not there's a trauma there in the first couple of hours. Because once I start getting you to understand how your mind works, how your brain works, I say, think of the brain as the computer. Think of your mind as the software that's running inside the computer, right? Two different things. So once we get you into, and this is really why our program works so well, as I say, I need to get your mind into optimal condition to start the healing process. That's why I use 4 hours. So if I tried to get you into that position where you could recall it or it's easy to come up with, or you think it's not bothering you, I wouldn't do that in the first hour. Your mind is going to block and protect you. So you have developed a way to, in your mind, to think that I've blocked it and I'm not dealing with it. But then I'll say, are you dealing with any health issues? Oh, yeah, I have this, I have that. Or they'll show up in all kinds of different ways. You think you're blocking it, but you're not. It's going to show up somewhere. And once we get to it and we can reset it, the whole system just resets. It's like a reboot of the system.
Yeah, which is amazing. And so someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, wow, that sounds interesting. And they might be starting to maybe acknowledge that trauma and those hidden things are there. But they're like, but there ain't no way I'm going to go to doctor and tell my story of all whatever happened in their past and things. And your approach to that is very different than a normal counselor that wants to rehash every little detail of the event. So what do you do in a situation like that?
I don't even know what the trauma is. They're welcome to share it if they want to share it. But I said it's not important for me to know what the event is. So I have processes that I can take you through that you don't even have to talk about it. I'll just have you visually see it. And while you're visually seeing it, I take you through the process to reset it. So I work with a lot of people who have had childhood trauma or people who have had a sexual assault. They don't want to sit there and start talking about a sexual assault. It's so difficult to talk about it. So I'll have them do it and they'll just visually see it, or there's a couple different ways I do it. For example, I'll say, can you tell me what happened to you in a new language? And they'll say, what do you mean a new language? I say, well, I'm going to teach you a new language today. And the new language is called flowing. And there's only one word in the flowing language, and it's flowing. So instead of saying, I walked into the room, you'd say flowing, every word's flowing, right?
Yeah.
And as you're saying flowing, you have to go into your memory to start seeing it. So I have no idea what you're telling me, but you're just going through flowing. And as you're doing that, the mind will reset it. It's amazing how fast the system will reset.
Hey, Dr. J here. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast and like the information that we're providing, be sure to subscribe and leave a review and like the podcast because it helps us to be able to expand our reach to find other entrepreneurs. Your support helps us to reach other entrepreneurs and help us to help them truly unlock their superhuman potential and make the world a better place. Yeah, so much potential there. And then I love you mentioned you have your new book coming out. And so it's so amazing how those things, those thoughts, those patterns that we had, like we talked about initially, are impacting so much that's happening in the body and even down to our DNA. And so I love the title of your book that's coming out very soon. You said, Don't Mess with My DNA. So tell me about that and that process and what do you teach people in that book?
So what I wrote is that I said that it's affecting the way our DNA is read and transcribed, especially from childhood. So a lot of times we see people who have had trauma that the inflammation will show up. That's the genes that are regulating inflammation. So we're not changing the DNA, but the genes that regulate the inflammation will adjust to the threat. So it's going to go into an inflamed state to protect it, a cell danger response. So then the genes that regulate inflammation are going to go high. The genes that regulate immune system are going to go low or turn off. That's an allocation of resources. We need to be focused on survival. We need more power for our survival than we do on maintenance. So I'll use the story that if you're being chased by a lion and you're trying to read a book, it's not going to want to read the book. You're going to be running. You won't be able to read much of that book at all if you can. So it actually affects the neuroplasticity. So the gene that regulates neuroplasticity also turns down or turns off. So now you've got this perfect recipe for disease and for struggle. So a lot of children, my wife is a perfect example. When I met her at 18, she had a lot of trauma. She was living with a very angry father, a violent man. And so she was living in fear. So when I first met her, she said to me, she goes, I'm not a very good student. And I said, why aren't you a good student? She goes, I can read a page in a book and I have to read it 3 times in order to absorb it. That was her mind protecting her because it was focused on survival, not on doing maintenance or not on learning. So we see so many people who have had trauma in their life and they struggle in school. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with the way the mind works. She's my best researcher now. She's amazing. So she'll constantly send me articles. She remembers what she wrote or what she read. It's really incredible. So that kind of stuff is what's happening all the time. And I explain that in the book. So if you've struggled in school as a child, don't think because you're not smart. It's because your system was protecting you and allocating more of its energy to survival. So what I show in the book is the study that we put together. So I published two studies. The first one was on DNA, and I showed that when people go through our program, we do a pre-DNA test. And then after they finish the entire program, go through the audios and everything, they do a post-DNA test. And we're showing anywhere from 40 to 50% reduction in inflammation and anywhere from 50 to 100% increase in immunity. It's incredible, the changes that happen and how fast it happens. And it sticks because now it's not looping anymore. And then the second study we did brain mapping. So we did QEEG brain maps on pre and post. The youngest person we had in our study was 15. Our oldest was 63. And so we mapped them pre and post. So the gentleman that I brought in, I wanted to have somebody independent do the study. So even in the DNA study, it's an independent company sending us the results.
Yeah.
So on the brain mapping, I had a guy come in. He's been doing this for 30 years. And he said to me, he goes, I've heard about what you're doing. I'm going to be honest with you. He says, I don't believe you're going to get a big change in brain plasticity that fast. He says, it takes a long time to get the brain to change. He says, so if you get a 10% change in brain plasticity, I would think that's a home run. He goes, I don't think you'll get 10, but if you do, I would be impressed. You know what we ended up getting?
I'm guessing more than 10.
45.3%.
Wow.
He went from our biggest skeptic to our biggest fan. He said, I didn't think that was possible to get that much change. That's how much trauma is affecting our physical and mental health. It's incredible.
Yeah. And even with something like that, getting your brain and your genetic responses changing that quickly, that you can be a completely different person in a short period of time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. And I see it all the time. This is why we call it a performance institute, not a trauma institute, because trauma just interferes with your performance.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing on that work on. I think we talked about this the other day. People will say, like people in addiction, they say, oh, we see the genes change on people who are in addiction. But what I said is you're measuring it after they're in addiction. So the genes have adapted to the trauma. And so, of course, they're changed, right? It doesn't mean that's how they're supposed to be. And they're equating it to, oh, we notice people in addiction have this and this and this. And I'm saying, but that's the symptom. That's not the problem. And what is everybody doing in the medical business? They study the sick people, not the healthy people. If you start studying the people who have not had those issues and you take their genes from there, that's what we're going for, not the sick person, not the person who's already had the trauma.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just like with the normal lab range, there's Quest Diagnostics when they're coming up with their lab ranges is looking at everyone, not the healthy people. Most people that are getting the labs done are the sick people. And so those ranges are mostly based on sick people ranges. It's very different ranges for a healthy, optimal function person. Same thing, just like we want a healthy brain functioning, we want healthy, optimally functioning lab work and lab results.
So you don't go to the doctor until you're sick, but we should be studying the healthy people and saying, what are they doing? What are they eating? How are they exercising? What's going on in their life? And model that behavior. And I believe, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I believe at least 80% of all the illnesses that we're dealing with are psychological and 20% are physical. So my daughter happened to be psychological. We didn't know it at the time, but once we fixed the psychological, she has no Crohn's, no lung disorder anymore. Both are gone. Her doctor actually said, I think you were misdiagnosed. And I said, you took out 24 inches of her intestines. I don't think she was misdiagnosed. She had Crohn's. And what he said was Crohn's doesn't go away. And so he said, it's a lifelong disease that you manage. And I said, I believe Crohn's was just inflammation. And the inflammation was caused by the trauma. When we solved the trauma, we solved the inflammation. Crohn's is gone. That didn't make any sense to him because that's not how he's trained. It's not that he's not smart, he's super smart to become a surgeon, but he's never seen that. And so his training would teach him that he has to manage this until they come up with a cure. But in my daughter's case, her cure was trauma.
Yeah, and it's like I've talked about it before too. Like conventional medicine is so amazing in what they can do to help people. But if there's something that's outside of what they read in their textbooks, which were created by mostly pharmaceutical companies, they just can't even believe or fathom that it exists and will just ignore it. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's the world we live in.
And, and then just hand you a pill. Like depression is a great example. If you go into your medical practitioner, your MD, and you say, I'm depressed, they don't ask why. They're just going to prescribe an antidepressant. But
Mhm.
it could be situational. It could be a job that you're dealing with. It could be a relationship you're dealing with, or it could be coming from trauma, unresolved trauma. But we stick them on an antidepressant thinking that's going to be the answer. And it's not. They really need somebody to resolve the problem. The mind does everything for a purpose. It goes into a depressed state to protect you, right? It goes into an anxious state to protect you. Post-traumatic stress is just a loop of the trauma running that it keeps thinking that there's a threat. And all we have to do is resolve the threat.
All right. So I know I have my opinion to the answer to this question, but I want to hear you explain it too. Who would be an ideal person to work with you?
Good question. Mostly anybody who's had childhood trauma is what I see a lot. And they know they've had trauma or they can identify it. Those are the ideal people. I do have people come in who have no idea that they had trauma or don't want to admit they had trauma. But the people who ideally know they have trauma, know it's affecting them, that's the ideal person for us. Because the thing that I hear all the time, Dr. J, is they'll say, oh, this is making so much sense now. Now I get it. Now I understand why my system has been doing this. It's not a choice. It's not something that they're choosing to do. I'm not choosing to be depressed. I'm not choosing to be anxious. It's just the way the system works.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would say I would even expand out who needs to work with you. Anyone who feels like they're stuck in life means that there's probably something running in that subconscious due to trauma, however big or small, that needs to do some subconscious reprogramming and to be able to help them get unstuck.
I had a lady, she was part of a group that I did, and she said to me, I asked for a volunteer to come up and I take them through the process, and I'll demonstrate a technique with one person, then we'll all do it together. So I said, anybody want to come up? So this lady puts up her hand and she comes up and she sits beside me. I haven't really had any trauma. And I was like, why did you volunteer? And so she says, and I said, can you think of a time in your life that you had an emotional concussion? Somebody said something, somebody did something. And so she says, okay, yeah, I've got one. She says, I was about 6 years old. She says, and as she's telling me the story, I can see her eyes starting to water up. And she said, I was in church, and she says, and I was talking to my siblings, and my grandmother took out her hairbrush out of her purse and she hit me on the head and said, stop talking, you're in church. And then the waterworks came. And it took her maybe 20, 30 seconds to catch her breath. And she said this to me, I lost my voice that day. I never knew that. She goes, I never stand up for myself. I don't fight back. I just let people push me around all the time. She had not connected it up to that day. The 6 year old is literal. What she heard her grandmother say to her is, stop talking. We don't want to hear you. And she took it literally and shut down.
Yeah. Those young minds are so impressionable, and little things like that are huge for a 6-year-old or huge for a 4-year-old or different things. And as we grow, we don't realize how big of an impact that's had for sure.
And I talk about that in my book, Don't Mess with My DNA. I tell a story about my wife. So she's got all this trauma. She's 6 years of age, same age. Between 0 and 7 are the big times when you see that happen. But she's 6, and some of the mothers in the neighborhood put a little tea party together. So she was all excited. Her grandmother dressed her all up in a pretty dress, did her hair. She goes to the tea party. And when she gets there, now this is my wife's dealing with trauma in her household. One of the mothers says when she comes in, she says, "Oh my gosh, Bridget, look at you. You're going to be such a heartbreaker when you grow up." And a couple of the other mothers went, "Oh yeah, she's definitely going to be a heartbreaker." She says, "I got sick to my stomach and I went home." What she heard is, "You're going to hurt people."
Yeah.
That's what she heard. They're complimenting her, but she heard, "You're going to break people's hearts." That's the last thing she wanted to do. She didn't want to hurt anybody. She was already hurt.
Yeah.
And when she told me that story, this is before I developed the program, she's in her 20s and she was sobbing, telling me that story because her mind felt the pain from when she was 6 as she told me the story.
Yeah. That's crazy. And really, I think every single person has things like that through their life. There's no one who made it through those first 7 years and then beyond that hasn't had those little emotional concussions there to affect them.
Yep. And they add up.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be a big T. It could be just something as simple as that. I have a lot of people say to me, "I had a great childhood. I never had any problems. Everything was working really well." But then they go back to an event like that where it can be something. And what I talk about in the book is be careful how you speak to your children because between 0 and 7, they are literal. They're in a theta brainwave state. They're taking in everything literally. And so they take it hard, right? What you say to them, but they don't have the ability to fight or run. So they just absorb it and they don't fight back. So they may cry or they may do whatever, but they don't know how to defend themselves because they think you mean exactly the way you said it. And yet you could be joking, you could just be sarcastic, whatever you did, but that's having a lasting impact on them.
Yeah. That reprogramming at that age just happens so fast. And before you know it, you're 45 years old and it's changed your whole life. So,
I see it all the time. And then it's going to show up in physical issues that you're going to see as well.
yeah.
And they've never connected it. So my wife Bridget said to me, after all the trauma that she was dealing with, she says every time she went to her doctor, she goes, never one time did her doctor ever ask her about trauma. Nobody ever questioned it. They just treated the symptoms. And so if they had have looked at some of the things, they may have connected it up to her childhood trauma, but nobody ever asked her. And she didn't connect it.
Yeah.
Not until we started doing all this research.
I'm amazed with the stuff that you're doing. It's definitely an amazing time to be operating outside of the conventional system that has been slowing people down and covering up for so long and ignoring problems, like you just said, which is why we decided that we need to get together and throw an event together and help people to perform their best. And so that's
Yep.
coming up at the end of October, the 24th and 25th on that weekend in Orlando at your office. So yeah, I'm excited about that. What do you want to share about that event?
I'm really excited about that. So it's going to be a combination of people going to learn what you do and learn what we do. And that combination is the perfect combination because we're going to do a holistic approach of the mind and the body all together. And so you'll learn things that you may have never known, you didn't know that you could actually work on. So I'm really excited to work with you on all of that.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be amazing. The unlocking the potential of your mind as well as hopefully unlocking the potential of your body as well. It's amazing where the new science is going with anti-aging and longevity. And then when we bring in the fixing the subconscious and getting your mind on board too, that's the epitome of becoming superhuman, like my goal to help people do.
But what I love about what you're doing is people can live a lot longer if you don't wear the system down. So I tell the story of if you get into your car and you step on the gas all the way down to the floorboard, but you use your brakes to keep you going 30. That's how a lot of people are living their lives. And then they
Absolutely.
go in and they go, my brakes are gone, my tires are worn out, my transmission's going, and then they come in to you to fix all of these things, yet they still have their foot on the gas.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super excited for that event. And so if you're watching this, listening to this, or wherever, there's somewhere in the show notes or the YouTube description, wherever is going to be the link where you can find out the information. And if it goes as well as we think, then we'll do these more than once. But yeah, I'm super excited to be able to share that with you. And yeah, so just in general, if someone's just listening to this and wants to start right away, how can they find you and what is it like working with you and what options are there?
Yeah, well, they can just go to our website, which is the Inspired Performance Institute, right up there on the screen. And then they can call in and talk to a tip advisor to talk about the options. We have one-on-one with me is one way they can do it. If they can't get to Orlando, I can do it via Zoom. If they have a group that they want to do it with, a company they want to, because you deal with a lot of entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
then we can do it in a larger group, or we have an online version of it. So they can actually go through the same program all online in the privacy of their own home, and they don't have to see anybody. So it's a great way, a great tool. We have a number of different ways to deal with it.
Yeah. It's amazing that you're able to have that big impact and be able to spread that from the comfort of your own home without having to one-on-one in person share those details that you tried to hide for so long from the big trauma that's been going on. Anyway, any final parting messages, Don, that you want to share with
It
us?
was funny too, because the online program, when I told my wife, I said, I think I can do this all online. So if somebody doesn't want to go through the whole process, or plus it's a lot less expensive because they're not dealing one-on-one with a person. She goes, I don't know. I don't think that would be as effective as working with you. And so when people say, what's the difference between working with you and doing the online program? I say it's the book and the movie. So if you read the book and then you go to the movie, you'll go, oh, I think the book was better. But if you just went to the movie, you'll go, oh, that was a great movie. So we can get into a lot more detail on a one-on-one, but the movie, the online program is very effective, and people get great results out of that as well.
Yeah, my wife has been going through the online program, and we talk regularly about the benefits that she's already noticed from that, with her helping resolve her trauma through her health issues and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. You guys have done that. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Don, it's been a pleasure as always. And I know we're going to be hopefully seeing you in person soon. And end of October, everyone can come. There's limited spots, but up until filling the room, can come and hang out with us and learn how to transform their life and reach levels of performance that they even never knew even were possible.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Don.
All right. Take care.
You enjoying the podcast? Help us reach more entrepreneurs like you by leaving a review. As a thank you, everyone who leaves a 5-star review will be entered into a drawing for some exciting prizes. We are here to help you more than just listen. Head over to superhumanentrepreneur.com, click on community, and join a powerful network of entrepreneurs that are striving to be their best. Each episode includes action steps, resources, and accountability to help you to implement these ideas and start seeing results.